Hi everyone, James Young. Thanks for joining the call. We'll be waiting for maybe one or few minutes, and we'll get started shortly. Thanks for joining the call, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more minutes so that we can get started. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get this started. This event is also being live streamed on YouTube, and I heard that there are some viewers on YouTube already, so we can just go ahead and get started. For today, we want to introduce Investor to the community, and we'll basically talk about what Investor is and what's the motivation behind building this, and answer any questions that people might have regarding the Investor. Before that, we can start with a quick round of introduction. So I'm Hong Hao from Filecoin. I'm a TPM on Filecoin team, working on Indexer along with some other infrastructure project. Next up, I will hand over to Will for intro.
Sure. Thanks, Hong Hao. My name is Will. I am a tech lead in indexing and more broadly in the Bedrock team. And we're looking at a bunch of sort of the broader protocols and interplanetary stack that is emerging of how do we get better connectivity between things like IPFS and Filecoin and other content address data more generally. And so over the last, it's been about 6 to 9 months, we've been working on this network indexing project as the next step. So excited to take questions and share a little bit more about what that is, the problem that we're solving, and what's happening in the future. Andrew, do you want to go next? I guess Andrew can't unmute yet. So let's go with Mayank and we'll see if we can get him unmuted.
Hi, my name is Mayank, and I'm a technical support engineer with Indexer team. Basically, so if you have a problem with the Indexer, you can just reach out to me on Filecoin Slack, or you can even tag me on the Twitter threads. We can try to help you out, and hopefully we'll get more and more participation with the Indexer.
All right. My name is Andrew Dillis. I am one of the main developers on the Indexer project, and I've been doing the design and development for the Indexer from the start, and will continue to do so as we grow it and scale it and integrate it with other efforts. So, be happy to answer your questions.
Awesome. Well, and thanks everyone for joining the call and the interest. And today, I think we can start with a quick intro of what Indexer is. And there are some common questions that we hear a lot from developer community, so we can address those first. And meanwhile, while we do that, feel free to bring up your questions. You can either unmute to us, hopefully you don't have a muting issue, or you can just post it in the chat in the Zoom, and we are monitoring the chat from both Zoom and YouTube so that we can address them from your questions offline. So with that, I can go ahead and get started. I think it might be most helpful to just briefly introduce high level what Indexer is, what our motivation is, and kind of walks through what's the design of like how does Indexer work. So the key incentive behind doing Indexer is that like right now IPFS use the DHT for the indexing, and we are putting the index in across different nodes on the DHT side. And right now we're spreading the lookup information, and but Filecoin has a lot more data compared to IPFS of the content. So if you put all this information in the current DHT, we'll risk like blowing over those DHT participants. And so we are now doing the network indexer as an alternative and more scalable, efficient solution for content lookup, where basically we store this data in a federated way in those more capable machines. And then while people try to look up those indexer stores the SID to provider mapping that looks up like for this SID, where can I get the provider information and be able to retrieve that content back efficiently. And this will be a key step toward the content discovery and retrievability in the Filecoin network, but also will serve as a foundation as we work toward the future IPFS Filecoin data interoperability so that we can get the data across these two different networks. So that's the high level of incentive and of how Indexer work. It's worth noting that Indexer is now live with Lotus, and we have around 3.5 billion last time I checked of SIDs being indexed. And right now it's enabled with Lotus 1.15, so that when storage providers are running the indexer process, running the storage process, we also have an index provider that sync these index to the indexer nodes to so that later people can use that for content lookup. So that's a high level. And I know Andrew prepared a design diagram for indexer workflow before. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to quickly kind of go through this to let people know how this works in high level.
Sure. Yeah, let's just go through the different parts of it. So that's just a diagram of the different components of the indexing ecosystem, which is not just the indexers, but shows storage providers and clients. So a storage client is someone who makes a deal to provide data to a storage provider. The storage provider then stores that data, but also wants to advertise the availability of that data. So in order to do that, they want that storage provider talks to an indexer. So at first it tells one or more indexers that the data is available. So it announces it through a gossip network, and indexers that are listening on that network will know that new data is available on the storage provider. So once the indexers know that, then they can go and sync the advertisement or however many advertisements are available, which means that they're going to go to the storage provider, ask for advertisements. And an advertisement is really a set of information about the data that's available. So it includes all of the CIDs or multi-hashes that make up the stored data and some information about that stored data. So the indexers sync that, pull that in, and then they're able to have information about who has any particular piece of, which storage provider has any particular piece of data that they've ingested. So later on, when a retrieval client wants to know where to actually get content from, it can take the CID or multi-hash of that content and ask an indexer which storage providers have it. The indexer can then answer with one or more storage providers, or well, 0 more storage providers that have that content. And the retrieval client can then go to the storage providers and retrieve the content that that storage provider has available. So that's what this diagram shows, is all those different pieces of interaction. And the indexers are what we're going to be focusing on talking about primarily today. And this diagram shows multiple indexers, but it's not showing them in any kind of a clustered or confederation of any kind. There's no federation of indexers in this picture, but that's something that, as Hong Hao mentioned earlier, we are currently working toward. But indexers can also be the independent entities that don't have to be running in any kind of configuration together.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. And so with that, I think we covered the high-level intro of the indexer, and now we can start taking questions. And if there's no questions, we can also start with some of the commonly heard questions that we heard. Okay, so I do see a question coming from YouTube. Say I want to create a content search engine. Will I be able to use the indexer for this? So Will or Andrew, like feel free to chime in, folks on the call.
You want me to give the initial high-level thing here? I think it's a useful building block for a full content search engine, but it's not a content search engine in itself. So the indexer is really just helping you do what the DHT does in IPFS today. It's the same abstraction in some sense, that if you have a hash of a content and you want to know who has that content, you can use the indexing system to do that lookup. But what it means is that now we have a lot of nodes that are providing their index and the content that they have available to the indexes. And they do this in the form of those ingested advertisements. And so what that means is there's now something that anyone who's making a search type tool can use to auto-discover nodes that have content, know how much content they have and what content they have, and know when new content shows up. And so you can follow storage providers in the same way that the indexing nodes do, using these advertisement chains to get alerted to when there is new content available. And then you can go and make retrieval requests for that content and index it yourself to get access to the content and do your full search engine. So this is a step in this design of it being sort of pushed into indexers makes that knowledge of where there is content much easier.
Thanks, Will. I think you kind of addressed this, but there's a follow-up question from YouTube, which is saying, I'm guessing I can only use it for SID lookup. And if I need a text searching meta indexing, I would need to build something on top of the indexer for that, which I think
That's correct.
Yeah, that's correct. Awesome. So we do have some other questions coming in. John asked the question of who or what pays for the indexer hosting and service. And that is a great question. I can have a start on that, and then other people can chime in. So right now we are run Protocol Labs, like PL is running the indexer node, and we are hosting it on cloud, and we are paying for that cost. Over time, there are two steps toward the decentralization. So one, we are working with some other partners to run the indexer node alongside with us. And over there, like some partners, they are paying the indexer hosting costs themselves when as they partnership with us. For example, Ken Labs, like calling out, shout out to Ken Labs, that is running indexer node along with us. And so that like we can basically have multiple indexers in the network. When we do intend to introduce more and more partners so that we can have a more decentralized way of running the indexer. And over time, but right now it's worth calling out. Right now, all of these indexer instances, indexer nodes are full replication of the data. There's no sharding at the moment, but that's part of the roadmap that we can talk about in a bit. And so as part of that, like while we get to the roadmap of sharding and each machine can store a smaller size copy of the data, then we can lower the burden, lower the entrance bar for people to enter the network, so that in the future, more people with even more ordinary machines can potentially participate in the network. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
I guess there's another piece to this, right? Which is, yes, there's a resource cost to running an indexer, but this is also an interesting and valuable data set that you end up accumulating. And so this index is in many ways equivalent to sort of what Google would have, for instance. And so there's a set of analytics things and a set of motivations why we expect some participants in the network to want to run indexers or something that has this functionality. So for instance, if you are operating a retrieval CDN, it's going to be in your best interest to have this index so that you know who to get content from quickly and reliably when you're asked for it. So we expect that there are useful incentives, even when the index is provided freely back to clients, that will cause people to run it. We've also looked a little bit into whether there's reasonable crypto economic setups that can get tied into this indexing and content routing setup. So you could imagine that when someone goes to get content, they could and then pays to download that content, there could be some sort of finder's fee that goes back to the indexing subsystem that made that matchmaking of which provider had the content. We're still working through what the crypto economic protocols are for those sorts of things, but we could imagine that as this indexing and content routing system evolves, that there could be direct remuneration at the protocol level for operators.
Thanks, Will. Okay. And by the way, I just want to say, at any point while we answer the question, and for the people who come up with a question, if you're in the Zoom call, feel free to also unmute and ask follow-up or clarify things that we didn't make it clear. Okay, I think okay, we'll have a lot of questions coming up in Zoom, so we just go through this list. Next up is Sean asked the question of what additional load will be put on the SP's market node by running the index.
So every market node that's going to be running, so you see if they're running the indexer themselves and they have all of the burden of indexing whatever content, or is the question meaning what load is put on it by using an indexer, not running an indexer? So running an indexer.
This is for storage providers. So this is being an index provider, not running the index themselves.
Yeah, so being able to use an index, being an index provider and being able to use an indexer, the additional load is going to be however many indexers the content is advertised to will be trying to ingest that content. We're working on ways to have that content be available from different sources other than directly from the index provider. So over time, that burden will get less and less, even though the number of indexers grows. But at this point in time, it's currently the number of indexers times the amount of load that the indexing content takes roughly.
With deduplication already on deals that are replicated. So for instance, so one thing that is worth pointing out is already today, many Filecoin deals are made to many providers, and the indexers will only get the CIDs in a deal once. And once they know, oh, this deal and this set of CIDs in this deal is this, they won't re-download it from other providers that have the same replica. I think the main point here is we expect CIDs to be a very small fraction of a deal, right? This is the metadata about the deal. And so that bandwidth should be minimal compared to the actual retrieval data requests that are coming into the provider. So the indexer should be certainly below 1% and probably less than that versus actual content data retrievals that are happening. And it's a necessary way to then get those content data retrievals to be able to happen.
Awesome. Next up, John asked the question, how does content expire in the indexer?
To that as well. Generally, content expires by the provider specifying that content is no longer valid and needs to be removed. We don't control expiration policies. That's really up to the provider of that data to control however expiration policies they want to work and tell the indexers that the data is no longer being served. The data can also expire if an index provider, sorry, if a storage provider becomes unresponsive and isn't able to serve the data anymore. The indexer, after some amount of time of verifying that the data is no longer available, can also expire the data that way. Or if a provider ceases to exist, all of the provider's data can be removed. But generally, it's by the provider telling the indexers that the data is no longer valid.
Next question is from Hassan. Is there any incentive for people to run indexer service? I can take a heads up on this. So first of all, it's good from the public perspective. It's good for the network because indexers are fundamental building block toward the data's content discovery, and for later for the retrieval. So this just helps the partner by partnering with us on the indexer node, just help our network scales and functions better. In terms of, I guess you're trying to get to the economic incentive side of things. In terms of that, I think it's twofold. Will mentioned this a little bit earlier too. So one is right now, if people try to run the indexer node, one advantage they could have is to know what content are commonly popularly queried, so that they can get a head start in terms of in the retrieval marketplace that is landing soon, to know that, hey, these are the data that are very commonly queried, so that we can store that data and then potentially get better incentive retrieval rewards. And that ties to the second part, which is in the longer term that is coming, that potentially we could bake in the crypto economic incentive into retrieval, and so that it ties to the indexing. Basically, for people who try to fulfill those retrieval requests, we will be providing, like, say, on-chain block rewards for those retrieval. Like, these are roadmaps that is work in progress, but those are the future looking things that might bring economic benefits for people who run indexer service. Okay. Next question, also from Hassan. Can we only search by CID or multi-hash? I'm assuming multi-hash is the same as COM-MP. So, Will, you want to take that?
Yes, multi-hash. This is the multi-hashes of the individual blocks of data that are within the deal. So it's not the COM-P, which is the identifier for the full 32 gig deal, but this is rather the individual files that are within that data.
Also from Hassan, is the indexer a separate service that needs to be installed along Lotus, or it will be bundled with Lotus?
It is within both markets as it exists today and will be within Boost as that gets used as an alternative.
Yep. Cool. Hassan also asked, does access to the SID mean that you are able to retrieve the data? So SID must be carefully guarded if your data is considered confidential or personal.
If this is stored on a public network, one might argue that the data should probably be encrypted if we want to keep it confidential. But otherwise, yes, if you're simply trying to prevent access to otherwise open data, then you would, if once the CID is known, then anybody would know who knows the CID could retrieve that from the storage providers that provide it. That being said, storage providers could provide their own authentication and authorization methods. That maybe a client would have to present some sort of a authentication to retrieve that data, but that's not something that the indexer has any control over.
Yeah. Although I think it might be worth calling out, like at least right now, like our mindset is that for contents that are indexed, they are publicly available and they should be made retrievable. We do hear some SPs calling out the need of skipping some of the contents to be indexed. So definitely let us know, because I know that for this call it might be muted, but like let us know in the Slack channel, and if you have additional requirements in terms of like data privacy and like kind of us skipping SIS indexing and things like that. And because we're actively improving indexer and gathering requirements, so we'd love to hear more voices on this as well. I think that will help us gather more data to improve the indexer.
And to be clear, the mentality that we've taken is that the indexer is an index of publicly retrievable content. So the content that is in the index, we want to reflect content that is available to get. And so the controls that are being worked on in markets is to make it easier to note that you have content that you don't want to make retrievable. So it's not that we're going to have some control for you to skip indexing it. It's that we're going to make it easier for you to say this content shouldn't be retrievable, because that's probably what we think you want. And so if that's not what you actually want, you should let us know. But that's sort of the current expectation of what needs to happen, is better controls to prevent both retrieval and indexing, because indexing should reflect what is available. So the way that you would control what data gets indexed is by making that data not available for retrieval in the markets node. And so there's already a retrieval filter, and we'll be working on additional mechanisms where you can at a deal level say that you don't want that deal to be retrievable.
Yeah, looks like Hassan's question is answered. Cool, thanks, Will. All right, next question. If I search for some of my sealed data using SID on SID. I guess you mean SID.contact. It's not SID.content. Will I be able to find it now? I ran some searches and it said could not be found.
If it's only ever been sealed and never unsealed, then the markets node won't know what content is within it. And so it will not be in the index. And so there needs to be typically an unsealed copy or the record of that data in the DAG store for that data to then be provided as available.
Just to add to this, so currently Boost is working on providing a manual method to basically add a deal to DAG store in case it has been missed for any reason or there was some error while it was supposed to be put into DAG store. So, that should allow in future to, manually add the deals that are not there or, errored out for any reason.
Okay, let's go to the next question from Sean. Can deals be omitted from indexing? Yeah, I think that's what we briefly talked about. At the moment, like we don't have this capability, but this is something that is the team is going to work on, which is you can potentially skip deals for indexing. But if that's not what you want, definitely let us know in the Slack channel, and we can discuss more. Okay. Next question is from John. Can an index provider leverage the indexer itself to spoof or bypass other storage providers? For example, I'm an indexer service provider. I see one request for a CID. I decide to copy that CID setter to my own local storage. With the second request, I tell the requester that I am the storage provider.
So the answer is currently, if an indexer sees content that is popular, we're not doing anything to actually hide what that content is at this point. So yes, potentially an indexer could find popular content and decide to store that itself and then serve it out itself, because it can see what the CIDs actually are and go retrieve the content. We do have a couple of proposals for how we would obfuscate the content, being able to hash the actual CIDs, and so that the indexer wouldn't know what actual content was being served. I'm not sure if we want to get into that discussion at this point. So yes, at the current point in time, that can happen. We do have plans to be able to mitigate that.
Awesome. I see a follow-up question from Sean G regarding the retrievability. So if a deal was retrievable, then later changed to not retrievable, the deal will be removed. Would the deal be removed from the index, from the indexer records?
Yes, so that sends an additional metadata item when markets no longer sees that deal, indicating that it's no longer available for indexing.
So I think that comes to the end of the list of questions. For see a bunch of people who joined, welcome. Thanks for joining. We talk about high level, what is indexer, or why are we doing this, and how does it work. This recorded YouTube streaming, so you can also see this on Filecoin, I think Filecoin YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, comment, and over there, like we are picking up questions from both YouTube, and feel free to type your questions that you have in the Zoom chat, and then we'll pick them up and address them. So we do prepare some other commonly asked questions that hasn't been mentioned. I think it might be worthwhile going through those too. So we talk about what is indexer and what's the benefits of doing that. And we just now we discussed a lot about how this indexer works and how do we provide the index. I think one thing that hasn't been discussed a lot is what's the roadmap, like the future looking side of the indexer. What does it look like going forward? I think it might be worth sharing. Will or Andrew, do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Go ahead, Will, but okay. Actually, where did you want me to start with that one? I'm sorry.
Sure, I can. So this is a roadmap one. I mean, so the first instance is just that we want to make content that is available, easily discoverable. And so that's going to be this first thing, which is sort of a monolithic instance that holds the whole data. And what we're working on now is making sure that scales up to all of the retrievable content that's online and available on Filecoin, and then making that accessible to the various clients like IPFS nodes and IPFS gateways, and other retrieval clients and networks that are currently trying to access content address data and could benefit from also being able to access Filecoin data. So once we get that basic, data pipeline flowing through, then we get some time to make it better. And the main ways that we want to make it better is we want to do a better job of making it a community run, cost shared part of the network, more blended in with the IPFS DHT as it exists. And then we want to work on the issues around security and trust that come with that. So how do we reduce the permissionness and allow more people to run it without opening ourselves up to Sybil attacks and other types of security issues that come with that. And so that's probably going to take us a while to get that. And at the same time, we're going to be managing scaling because Filecoin is growing. And it's growing pretty quickly. And so we'll get before too long to a place where one node is going to struggle to have both the storage capacity to hold all of the index data and the capacity to serve requests for all of the people who want to do lookups for the index. And so we're thinking about what the scaling strategies are, both to distribute the query load and to distribute the content itself.
And on a related note, Andrew, I think it might be worthwhile to share also what's the current performance kind of expectation for the indexer, like in terms of our scaling, our latency, our speed and uptime and these things.
I think we can probably provide some diagrams for giving some rough estimates, but certainly that's very dependent on what the underlying infrastructure is. So it's not like I can say exactly what the performance is going to be for any provider, but we can say here's some general storage metrics for our current storage strategy and things like that. So I don't have those diagrams at the moment, but I can certainly provide those in a follow-up. Yeah, we can discuss that. I think that the more important discussions are really about the overall scaling strategy, but also distribution strategy, where you have different entities that want to run their own indexing for their own data. And is there a way of making that valuable? Or do we primarily have centralized indexing, or really some combination of both? Point is that indexing, just want to say, indexing as a centralized indexer is a fairly large undertaking if you're talking about indexing all of the world's content. So it's not something that everybody would really be interested in doing.
Yeah, and also I'd like to call out, since we're talking about running multiple indexers, that because I think we have a lot of SPs or here in the call or viewing us, also call out that we are actively looking for partners to run indexer nodes with us. Definitely reach out to us on Slack or to me directly if you're interested in running one. We have a public Notion page documenting how to do so, like the guidance for setting this up. So I can also share this in the chat in a bit. But yeah, like we would definitely like to work with you for helping decentralizing the indexer and supporting the network. Okay. Go ahead.
Just wanted to say we do have the ability to control what storage providers you're talking to. So if you want to run an indexer for only your content, or maybe for content from specific providers, those controls are in place. So you don't have to index the entire world's content if you don't want to. So there is ability to have some control over what you're indexing.
And the Slack channel that I was referring to is Store the Index. It's the same as our GitHub repo name as well in the Filecoin channel. And this is a link to the public Notion page on the how to run the indexer and some of the commonly asked questions that we heard for running an indexer. Okay. One more question from John. What key values storage strategy is being used in the indexer service?
So we have a specialized key value store, which is very efficient for storing multi-hash data. And we could use any generic key value store. So those are options for other indexer implementers to use whatever works for your infrastructure and things like that. But at the scale that we are running at, the efficiency offers a huge cost savings in storage. So we have a very customized solution. You can always look at our public GitHub repos and see what we're doing, how it works. And so all of that information is public, but we do is a specialized storage solution.
We do also want to call, if people are interested in running indexer nodes with us, we do welcome different implementations. We encourage other implementations, doesn't really need to follow exactly what we're doing. What we are trying to standardize is, which we're publishing a FIP for, is the way that data get advertised to provide to the indexer. So we are trying to standardize that part, which is how data are published over the Gaussian sub and using the advertisement structure to provide it. But in terms of how do you actually store the data and how do you run the indexer node, that is up to you. You can have different implementations.
fact, there's even an interface that's present that as long as that interface is implemented, you can put whatever storage you want behind it, whatever database, key value store, anything you want. There's already an example of using a couple different ones.
Cool, awesome. So I think those are the list of the frequently asked questions that we had to. Is there anything, Will, Andrew, Mayank, anything, other things that you think hasn't been covered that is worth calling out? Feel free to bring them up too.
Just want to restate that our indexer is not the indexer. It is just an implementation, a reference implementation. What we're trying to do is publish standards and protocols so that so that people can implement indexing and be able to provide their own solutions if necessary.
Cool. Is there any other questions from the participants in the call? And if there's questions, feel free to just type them in the Zoom chat. Okay, we do have some more questions coming from Sinan. If a person maliciously sends out a deal that contains millions of IPLD CIDs, will it cause any issue with the storage provider or indexer node? That's a great question.
So yeah,
go ahead, Andrew.
Oh yeah. So we can determine which providers we will talk to. So if there's a bad actor like that, we can certainly cut them off and remove any of the content and stop retrieving any more content from that provider. But yeah, if somebody that was trusted did start behaving maliciously, yeah, it could be potentially costly, but then we could also see that we were having a disproportionate amount of data. One of the things that we're also building is a reputation system, which is going to be making sure that the data that is advertised on indexers is actually retrievable. So if we saw a large amount of data being put on an indexer that was not actually retrievable, then that would affect the reputation rating and would eventually cause that entity to be delisted from the indexer.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the point that there's a distinction to draw. If you make a dense IPLD graph, that by itself is not malicious. And in fact, that looks a lot like, for instance, the Filecoin chain itself. It's lots of small IPLD objects. So that you have deals of millions of objects is not a problem by itself. As long as that content is retrievable, that is content that we want to flow to the indexer and we want to make available to people looking for it. So no, it doesn't cause problems. We in fact already have deals and content that has millions of items in them. And so the only thing that we need to make sure of is that there aren't sort of infinite advertisements where we keep trying to fetch the data and never get to an end of it. And so there's these ways that in the protocol there are limits, but there are limits that will not be hit, right? Though the protocol specifies ways that you break up data effectively to allow us to ingest it in pieces. And so if you aren't following that part of the protocol, that's when there's problems and your provider might get delisted. But the current implementations of the providers follow that protocol. So if you're running the markets process as it's been distributed, you'll have no problems with that. And then the second part is just that the content that comes in, we expect, and the reputation system that gets built up is going to make sure that via spot checks, we actually can retrieve that content that has gotten to the indexer. And we'll choose to either rank providers or otherwise, filter the subset of providers that are returned to clients based on ones that are believed to be actually working for retrievals.
Thanks, Will. Andrew. Next up, John has a question. Is there a document that documents the index API? Yeah, we do have the documentation. I will paste it in the chat, but it's for people who are on the YouTube. It's on the store the index GitHub repo. And if you go to doc, there is a lot of documentation in terms of how can you create an index provider, how does index provider publish the data to the indexer, as well as the diagram that we just shared regarding the ingestion and the overall architecture design of the indexer. So I'm sharing this links in the chat. Cool. Any other questions that we can help answer? Okay, so it looks like we addressed most of the questions, hopefully all the questions that folks might have. And Paige, if there's more questions from YouTube, feel free to let us know. Okay, so just one more. John, are you planning for a mechanism where indexers can sync to one another? That's a great question too. Yeah, feel free to go ahead.
Short answer is yes. There's a number of questions about how we do that, and do we do that within a close federation of indexers? Do we do that across a distributed set of indexers? So there's a number of design questions remaining for that. But yes, when we start up an indexer, we want to be able to bring it up quickly, when we be able to have them learn information from each other about providers that one may know about that another may not, and be able to share information that helps them quickly come up to speed and distribute their information efficiently. So yes, there's a lot of aspects to that.
Yeah. So kind of coming back to what we talked about a little bit earlier at the beginning of the call for folks who wasn't human at that time. It's part of the roadmap where right now we are running full replication of the indexer. And then going forward, we want to move from the full federation to a more sharded design where it will require indexers to sync with each other. And eventually we want to bring down the cost to joining the indexer network so that it's more decentralized and people with more lower capacity machines can also join and participate.
Right, and also to lower the cost to the storage providers. I think it's probably what the question was hinting at, so that we don't have every single indexer trying to get data from every single storage provider. In other words, an indexer can get it, and then the indexers can share that information with each other as opposed to hitting the storage provider. So yes, that's also one of the goals.
Cool, awesome. So if there's no other questions, then I guess we can wrap up. Thanks a lot for all the questions and for the interest. As we mentioned, we'll be always available on the Store the Index channel in Filecoin. If there's any other questions, feel free to just ping us there. And also we are looking for partners to run Indexer node to work with us. So definitely let us know if you're interested, and feel free to call any other requirements that you might need for Indexer, so that it'll help us better plan and prioritize as well. But thanks a lot for joining us. It's been a pleasure.